right, welcome everybody to our fourth episode of Paleo Talks. We are doing this each Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time, different paleontologists to talk about research, to get the word out while we're all at home right now. This week we have special guest Rachel Short, and Rachel was one of our past graduate students, and we're going to introduce her more in just a moment. I also want to introduce David Moscato, who is the co-host here. If you want to say hi, David.
Hello, everybody. Oh, go ahead.
I guess you're not spotlighted right then, were you? That's okay. But David is, David is our SciComm person. He basically is our science communicator. If you want to add a little bit more, David, about sort of the layout of how we do this.
Sure. So this will be basically framed as a Q&A. So we'll start off giving Rachel some questions and some prompts to work through the topic at hand, which is rhinos at the Gray Fossil Site, which is something she has done some very exciting work on. And then about halfway through, we will open it up to Q&A from the audience. So there is a Q&A tab down at the bottom of your Zoom window. So you can put questions in there and we'll go ahead and be able to answer them.
Great. All right, so again, my name is Dr. Blaine Schubert. I am the director of the Center of Excellence in Paleontology here, which oversees the Gray Fossil Site. And Rachel Short came to us as a master's student, and her master's project actually is this rhino. So Rachel, we'll turn it over to you. Move over to your screen.
Okay. I'll go ahead and share the slides I've prepared, maybe.
So Rachel, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your overall research quickly. You're a PhD student right now at Texas A&M, right?
I am. So I'm a PhD student. I'm defending in 2 weeks, so almost done at Texas A&M. And I did my master's there at ETSU on the Rhino. I also did a master's in teaching at the University of Maine. I started in Illinois. I grew up in Central Illinois, went to Illinois Wesleyan for my bachelor's degree. So it's a long, convoluted route to get me here. But a lot of my academic time has been spent on this rhino.
Right. And how did it come to be your project?
So before I came to ETSU, I interned at Ashfall Fossil Beds in Nebraska. And this is in situ site, so in the ground, full of rhinos. They're laid out in a watering hole covered in ash, and we excavate in the ground. It's amazing. And when I applied to ETSU, Dr. Wallace had told me that you had a rhino at Gray that someone needed to work on, and I had worked on these rhinos, so he just put us together. So this is where I met Keela. So I knew Keela before I ever came to ETSU because we interned together at the site, and she was the one who told me about ETSU.
That's quite a thesis project to get to work on, something that significant at the Gray site.
Yes, it was incredible, and large. It was a very large project, both the size of the rhino and what came out of the research.
And so you and colleagues published that relatively recently.
I think, yeah, last year. Last April we published this. So this is the cover page of the Florida Bulletin that published the paper. It's a new species, and Stephen Wallace and Laura Emmert are my co-authors on it. They're both around Gray all the time.
Well, great. Well, if you'll just sort of walk through and tell us a little bit more about the Gray Fossil Site rhino and why it's unique.
Sure. So you can see the picture here on the bottom right. That's our rhino in the exhibit hall. This is the smaller of the two skeletons that we have. This is little guy. So I want to start with what is a rhino before we dive into the specifics of our rhino. So these are the 5 rhinos we have today: white, black rhinos, Indian, Javan, and Sumatran. Rhinos as a group, they're the order Paracetactyl, with tapirs, which are also very common at the Gray site. I'm sure you've talked about tapirs, and horses. So these animals have odd number toes. You can see the rhino feet on the left has 3 toes. Horses have 1, tapirs have 3, and that unites this group, as opposed to artiodactyls with the split hoofs. They also have these modified teeth. They have tusks on their jaws. So this is our skull from Gray. This is Big Boy. And you have, let's see, can you see my cursor if I do this? Okay, so you have this upper tusk and this lower tusk that work together and they hone each other. So that's a characteristic of the rhino group, the family. And then these are our teeth at Gray. This is Big Boy's skull. And rhinos have, if you flip the teeth, these W and pi shaped teeth. So we know it's a rhino because it has rhino shaped teeth, just like this. Ooh, so we can talk about rhino evolution, the origin of rhino. My slides are gonna jump a little bit, I apologize.
Hey, that's not an ETSU football field.
It's not. I'm an Aggie now, and so I have an Aggie football field. So we can go into the origin of rhinos real quick. If we think about it like a football field, we have the Earth forming 4.6 billion years ago at this end zone, and today at this end zone. We get animals here. Dinosaurs live just a little bit there at near the end line. The rhinos appear just shy of the goal line at 40 million years ago and go extinct at 4.5 million years ago. There's humans, which is, I believe I did the math, it's like an inch from the goal line. And then there's the Gray fossil site, just right there at the end. So it's fairly recent in geological time, even though we don't think about rhinos in North America as recent. Teleoceras is the genus of rhino that we have. In the map here, the pink starburst is Gray, that's our site. The purple box is Ashfall, the site that I started at in Nebraska. And most rhinos in the Teleoceras genus are these short-legged, pot-bellied rhinos, like you see on the screen here. You know, they've been called dachshunds and pot-bellied, and this is what you would expect. This is what's all over the Great Plains. And this is the reconstruction that was done of the Gray rhino, also pot-bellied. But then we started digging up more. We have these 2 skeletons that are nearly complete. We have Big Boy and Little Guy. And we've got them out of the ground in collections, ready to go when I get there. And I decided that there was something that didn't look quite right about these rhinos compared to what I knew about Teleoceras, which admittedly was the site in Nebraska. And I knew it just wasn't quite right, Blaine. Like there was something that was going on there. So I did this work, and we decided that based on the data we found, this is a new species, and we called it Teleoceras apesoma. This is artwork by Keela, so Keela's still involved with my rhino life. And let's see, so we have the 2 individuals. It doesn't have a horn like we think about with rhinos. So in modern rhinos, like you see here, you have this rough rugosity where the horn sits on the bone. It attaches there. Our skulls are nice and smooth. There's no real horn there, which is not uncommon in the history of rhinos to have no horn. It makes up for it with these big tusks down here. Interestingly, our rhino is a browser instead of a grazer. So this is dental work that was done by DeSantis and Wallace back before I started on the rhinos. And it just means that the rhino is eating the leaves, probably hickory nuts. We have hickory nuts all over the site, as opposed to the grass, like the white rhino here. Wrong way, sorry. So this is what really makes our rhino unique. We have these long front legs, and you can see in these plots here, I measured rhino bones from all over the country, all of the limb bones, the long limb bones, and they all come out the same way in the front leg. Our rhino is over here. It's incredibly long compared to all of the other Teleoceras species. And this data is actually from Don's book. So, hi Don, thanks for the data.
Well, what were the characteristics that classified it to that genus in the first place?
That's a great question. So Teleoceras has these really compressed feet. It's really unique amongst rhinos to have these compressed foot bones, and ours is without question compressed like Teleoceras. We did take a load of the bones down to the Florida Museum and compare it to their material. Aphalops is the other very common rhino genus at the time, and it has these long, slender bones. So we're pretty certain it's Teleoceras. So my wild theory about this is that by elongating their front legs, they lifted their head to browse. So it goes back to that feeding ecology. So now I just have a couple interesting things about our rhinos. Big Boy, the big male, he was probably about, I think I estimated 13 years old or so. He had some broken bones in his body, so we can kind of get an idea of his lifestyle or his life in general. So this is a back toe that was broken. So this is a healthy toe. You have 4 bones in a healthy toe. He had 3 bones here because they had broken so badly and refused. So at some point, his foot was probably stepped on or crushed in some way and broke those toes. And then his ribs were also broken, probably multiple times, and refused. So he had a rough life, but he survived all of this and continued living. So this is just a general idea of what happened to the rhinos. It's not entirely well understood, but there was a lot going on at the time globally. And so there was a lot of environmental change happening and species movement. And so they were likely just edged out by environmental climatic conditions.
Are there younger records of rhinos in North America than the Gray Fossil Site?
Maybe marginally, but ours is one of the last. So there are a handful of sites that are considered like the very latest Hempelian, or say like the last rhino site, but they're all in that same little time cluster. And so yeah, ours is definitely one of the last.
And it was the rhinos that originally helped to bracket the age of the site.
It was, yes. So rhinos go extinct at 4.5 million years ago in North America. And that's pretty well established across North America. There's just an end to a number of species, but the rhinos in particular. And so we knew our site wasn't any younger than that. And then the bear, I believe, was the other end. It doesn't appear until 7. So we knew the site was somewhere between 4.5 and 7.
I don't know if I ever told you the story or not, Rachel, of how the original rhino was identified. And I was at the Illinois State Museum when Paul Parmalee brought it up there in 2000.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I was there. Paul Parmalee was the one involved in the discovery of the Gray site, and he was at UT, and he brought that specimen up to the Illinois State Museum to have paleontologists look at it. And I was a research associate there at the time, and Rick Toomey was there, and Jeff Saunders was there. And he had a part of a jaw with teeth, and we took it in and identified it as rhino in the modern mammalogy collection. Not knowing anything about Gray, it had just been discovered, but interestingly, it was what ended up pushing the age of the site, you know, way back beyond the Pleistocene thoughts that they were having. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Hey, Blaine, do you mind if I chime in with a question?
Yes, of course.
Before you do that, real quick,
sure, go ahead.
Can we give a shout out to the Illinois State Museum? Because they have been part of all of our careers now, I think. I know Blaine and Chris worked there. I've done a lot of my dissertation research there. So shout out to the Illinois State Museum.
Yeah, it's how I got started. It really is. So.
Okay, sorry, David.
Oh, no problem. That's a good shout out. Can you talk a bit about how these rhinos compare to modern rhinos? Like if you put them side by side in terms of size, in terms of behavior and ecology, would they look weird walking around in Africa today alongside the other rhinos?
I would say yes, in that you would know they were different, but you would still know it was a rhino. So they have a slightly different body plan. They're shorter pretty round. Today's rhinos are also pretty round. Like it's the same general idea, but a little different. They would be browsing, so they would be more like the black rhino than the white rhino today. Let's see, they don't have the horn, they have the tusks, and so that's more similar to Asian rhinos instead of African rhinos. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, that's great. If I remember correctly from your study, you also had a size estimate.
Ooh, I sure did.
And I think it was similarly sized to today's big rhinos.
Yes, I forget the numbers. I should have studied. I forget what the numbers were. But the big male, big boy, so they're both males. I don't know if I said that. They're both males. But big boy, the biggest, older one, he was roughly the same size as the male white rhinos today, like, which is massive. And this is based on measurements of the leg bones and calculations that have been used. And I didn't believe it at first. I had to convince myself. So I ran the analyses like 3 different ways. I used different formulas. I used different bones, and he was coming out massive every time.
Wow. So shorter, but still just as
Hefty.
weighty. Very cool.
So things we know about our rhinos is we have 2 relatively complete skeletons.
Yes.
What's our M&I, our minimum number of individuals right now?
I think we're at about 7. Might be pushing up to 9 or 10.
Okay, so it's basically around our second most abundant.
But the 2 skeletons are nearly complete. Little guy's only missing 1 toe bone. It's incredible. But other than those 2, it's very fragmented, and it's the numbers based on ankle bones. So it's not like we have 7 complete skeletons.
So we have this rhino that's living here in the Appalachians. It was relatively taller. It's a new species. It was browsing. What are questions that we might have about gray fossil site rhinos that we don't know yet?
Ooh, also a good question. I have lots of ideas. So I want to find a female, first of all, and look at just differences between the males and females. We have found what look like fetal bones of rhino. Like, it was found with these rhinos. It's definitely fetal bone. So we know there was a female in the area at some point. It's weird to have a site of this age without having aphelops too. So at most sites, especially late Miocene sites, you have teleoceras and aphelops. And teleoceras is typically the pot-bellied grazer, which ours is not. And aphelops is typically the long-legged running type of rhino.
Right.
And they typically live together. And we haven't found any aphelops. So my wild-haired theory about this one is that teleoceras was filling the role of aphelops here, and there just wasn't ecological space for it. But I have no evidence for that.
Okay. Don't forget, people that are listening in right now, you can go ahead and submit a question, either to the question and answer or the chat. Both of them are actually available.
Q&A will be the way to go.
Okay.
And yeah, now's a good time to start taking those questions. So if you have a question, go ahead and type it into the Q&A. Scroll down to the bottom of your Zoom window and you'll see a Q&A button, and we'll be able to read the questions out from there. So if you have any questions about rhinos, or specifically the gray fossil site rhinos, that's the place to do it.
So in the meantime, Rachel, how would you know if you have a female rhino?
That's a great question too. You're full of good questions, Blaine.
And that actually, so we just got a question that ties right into that, which is, why are there no females?
Okay, so we don't know why there aren't any females. There certainly should be in a population of rhinos. It's probably that we just haven't found it yet. We do have the hand bones that are quite a bit smaller than our 2 complete skeletons. And females tend to be smaller than males in rhinos and other animals. And so it could be that that's the hand of a female, but again, there's no real evidence for that. You tell the difference between male and female rhinos by those lower tusks. So here you can see is lower tusks down here. Male rhinos have tusks that are like 3 of my fingers, like this. and female rhinos are like a pinky finger tusk. So these rhinos are certainly male because of the size of their tusk. And this was, it's seen in modern rhinos, it's seen in fossil rhinos. The small tusks have been associated with pelvis shape and size. That's been related to male and female.
So a follow-up to that question, we have a question in the Q&A that it says, is it similar to the story at the mammoth site, i.e. the males are dumb? So for anyone who doesn't know what that means, there was some research done on the mammoth site which found that most of the mammoths in the site are male, and the idea being that maybe the males are getting into more trouble than the females are. What do you think?
I suppose that could be. With only 2, it's hard to say that that's the case. The tapirs don't follow that pattern. The rhinos at Ashfall don't follow that pattern. I would like to think the rhinos are smarter than the mammoths. But I don't think we can answer for certain that that's what was happening. I think it's just luck of the draw at this point. We happened to uncover 2 males.
So Don Prothero has commented in the Q&A, curious about, so he says, Teleoceras typically has a small rugosity on the tip of the nasals. Mm-hmm. So what can you say about horns on those skulls?
So I know some skulls do have that rugosity. That's where the horn attaches on those skulls. And in some species, it's been described as like a nubbin is the word that Wallace used to describe them. Our rhino has a little raised bit there, but it's completely smooth. So the muscle attachments like on the skull are more rugose than anything we see on the nasal bones. So I don't think ours has a horn, but I do think it's reasonable that other species of Teleoceras have a horn.
And speaking of mysteries about Teleoceras, mm-hmm. Dario has asked, how aquatic was Teleoceras? I've heard that they were almost like hippos.
Yeah, so this is one of those great unknowns, I think. There's a lot of, well, not a lot, there's been work done showing that they could be aquatic. And I think a lot of that comes from their morphology, the heavy bones and the plump body, and they're often found near water. And so it could be. It's not something that I have researched very specifically, and so I can't speak to the details, but I think if they were semi-aquatic in some way, they were also semi-terrestrial. It was a back and forth kind of thing. Probably not as aquatic as hippos are.
All right, another question. This one comes from Matt Gibson, a Matt we're very familiar with. So you showed in your slides that there was damage to the ribs of the big boy specimen. Mm-hmm. Are there any indications as to what may have caused that damage? Also, is there evidence of damage in modern rhinos from mate competition?
I know that Laura has looked into this a little bit. I don't know that we have a real answer. The position on the ribs could be from charging of another rhino, which we do see for mate competition. Males will fight over females, and where those broken ribs occur, it would be reasonable to say that could have happened. It's also possible he fell over for some reason, or maybe, I don't know. It's hard to say, but we can speculate. And so I think being charged by a male during some kind of mate or territorial competition is probably likely, especially since he survived. It was probably like, get out of my way kind of thing. And
yeah. He also has injuries on his toes, right?
Yes.
And can you talk about the story there?
So again, we're not sure what happened. It's likely it was crushed in some way. So there's been some speculation around the site that perhaps it was a mating accident, and his foot got stepped on in the process. But again, we don't really know. It's just fun to think about. Have we seen any of that in any wild animals or zoo animals, maybe, where there'd be a parallel? I want to say that Laura had contacted the Buffalo Zoo
That's
and
what
maybe
I was thinking. I was
had
thinking
something.
that we
Um,
try and bring Laura in. Let me see if I can get her.
yeah,
Well,
get
if
Laura.
Laura, if you want to you can also comment in the Q&A and we'll be able to see it if you'd rather type your answer.
I'll also
Oh, she's fine.
I'll allow her to talk.
Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Hey, okay. Hi, good to see you. You're doing great.
Thanks. Do you have any insight on these pathologies? You're a pathology person.
Yeah, a little bit, mostly in reference to the modern skeleton. So I had been in contact with the veterinarian at the Buffalo Zoo, and a specimen of a male Indian rhinoceros that we have does exhibit a similar pathology. And the vet had said at some point during his life, he said, oh yeah, he did fall off of a female during mating, and we were wondering if he'd broken any ribs or not. But they, you can't exactly x-ray a rhino, so they were really interested to hear that when we called, and we're like, hey, so he's got a broken rib. Do you know what happened? So
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
So for our audience, the person speaking now is Laura Emmert, who is, as Rachel mentioned, co-author on the Rhino study and currently one of our gray fossil site paleontologists. Thanks for chiming in, Laura.
Thanks, Laura.
Here's another question. Larry asks, on the slide about what happened to the rhinos, there is an animal in the lower right. What is that?
Over here. This
That
guy,
weird thing with horns, yep.
That's called a mylogolid. So these are horned rodents that lived in North America, and they were one of the casualties at around the same time as the rhinos. They were, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they were like normal rodent size. They just had these massive horns on their heads.
And speaking of fossil-y things, Sophia has asked if the first rhinos were different from modern day rhinos.
Yeah, good question, Sophia. So the early rhinos were a lot smaller, a lot more slender. They were kind of more like the tapirs that we have at the site. So all the way back, maybe. This isn't the easiest way to do this. I promise I'll answer, Sophia. Sophia is Michelle's daughter.
Oh, I see.
Let's see. There we go. So the early rhinos were more like the tapirs, like this animal here. And they were, yeah, smaller. They didn't have as developed shapes on their teeth, and they were just more generalized, I guess.
Excellent. One of our current grad students, Matthew, has asked, your distribution map showed several other sites with rhinos in the southeast. Have you gotten to look at some of the other rhinos from places like Alabama and Louisiana? And if so, how do they compare to gray?
So I haven't looked at the ones from Alabama and Louisiana. As far as, I take that back, I might have. I don't remember exactly which locations were in the Smithsonian and AMNH collections. I have not gone to Louisiana or Alabama to look at those. I have gone to Florida a number of times and looked at the rhinos in their collections, specifically their Bone Valley rhinos. And I know they're getting a lot of rhinos from Montbrook now, which would be really interesting to look at, but I haven't seen those.
Another of our current students, Dave, says or asks, do modern day rhinos that differ in feeding strategy, grazing versus browsing, also differ in their social behavior? And if they do, can we apply any of those behavioral assumptions to our gray rhinos?
My goodness. So I don't study modern rhinos, for the record, but based on what I remember, I believe most, if not all, modern rhinos are solitary as adults, unless they're breeding females. I know sometimes they'll form herd structure, but yeah, I'm not confident enough in my memory of herd behaviors in rhinos to say. I don't think that there's differences based on their feeding though. So I would think that that whether they're eating grass or browsing, they're likely similar. Like white rhinos and black rhinos have similar structures to their herds. So I think regardless of what they're eating, they tend to be solitary, but sometimes form herds. And so I think we can say that's likely what our rhino was doing, but again, we don't know for sure.
And actually, a related question comes from another of our current students, Tom, who's asking, given enough rhino specimens, if we have females and males, could we potentially use the number of males, females, and juveniles to determine something about the herding structure?
We could certainly give it a shot. So it would depend on how many it takes to understand modern herd structure. So I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how modern mammalogists who study rhinos do their herd estimates. So we would need a good number, but I think in the future with more digging, we can give it a go. Has some work been done on the tapers on that yet? Has anyone looked at that kind of
I don't think so.
herd behavior?
And Blaine's shaking his head, which tells me that I'm right.
We have add it to the list.
We are just about at the end. There is one last question in the Q&A.
Okay.
If you want to answer one more quick. This
Sure.
is from Sarah. You mentioned that you found some smaller foot bones that could possibly be from a female. Is it possible to estimate the age of the animal using the toe bones so that you can at least eliminate the possibility of it being a juvenile?
So kind of. So they're fused. So the ends are fused. So we know it's an adult. We can't really get more specific than that. So I said that the big rhino that we have, the big skeleton, is like 13 years old or 15 years old. And that's based on the wear of the teeth, not the leg bones. And so once the feet bones are fused as an adult, they just stay fused foot bones. And so we can't say where in the adult age that rhino falls. But we compare it to the adult foot bones of these two skeletons and know that it's smaller. And so it could be a small male or it could be a smaller female. But we can't get any more specific than adult.
All right.
Okay, good questions, everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, that was excellent. Thank you so much for joining us, Rachel, and thank you everybody for tuning in to Paleo Talks this week. I'm going to stop the recording right now. If anybody has any additional questions, we will be around for just a moment more. But thanks again, Rachel.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun. And thank you everyone for listening.